Have you ever had that feeling, that prickling on the back of your neck that tells you something is deeply, fundamentally wrong in your own home? It's not the fear of a ghost or the dread of a creaking floorboard in an old house. It's the chilling, violating sensation of knowing your private space, your sanctuary, has been breached by another human being. For me, that feeling arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered not by a shadowy burglar, but by the smiling, perfectly coiffed tyrant of our neighborhood, the HOA president herself. My name is Alex, and for the better part of 2 decades, my life was a labyrinth of numbers, firewalls, and deception. I was a forensic accountant and cybersecurity analyst for a federal agency you've definitely heard of, but I'm definitely not supposed to name. My job was to untangle the most complex financial knots and follow digital breadcrumbs to bring down criminals who thought they were untouchable. It was a high-stakes, high-stress world, and when I finally took an early retirement, all I wanted was the polar opposite. I wanted quiet. I wanted peace. I wanted a small house in a sleepy suburb with a manicured lawn and neighbors who did little more than offer a polite wave. Maple Creek seemed to be that perfect, tranquil place. The houses were neat, the trees were mature, and the homeowners association, I was told, was primarily concerned with keeping the petunias in the common areas looking fresh. I should have known better. The serpent in this particular Eden was named Carol Miller. She was the self-appointed queen of Maple Creek, the president of the HOA, a woman who wielded the book of covenants and restrictions like a scepter. My first interaction with her was a neatly typed, passive-aggressive note left on my door about the precise angle of my garbage cans on collection day. Apparently, 90 degrees to the curb was the only acceptable orientation. My casual 75-degree placement was an affront to community standards. I'd rolled my eyes, corrected the egregious geometric error, and moved on. But the notes continued, each more pedantic than the last. The shade of my garden gnome's hat was non-compliant, the brand of my welcome mat was unapproved. It was irritating, but I chalked it up to the price of admission for a quiet life. I could handle a petty dictator as long as she stayed on her side of the property line. The day she crossed, it was the day she fundamentally misunderstood the kind of man she was dealing with. I had been out for a few hours, a routine trip for groceries, and a stop at the hardware store. When I returned, something was off. The air was still, the sun was bright, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. My front door, which I had double-checked was locked, was now slightly ajar. Just a crack, but it was enough. My mind, trained by years of paranoia and professional caution, went into high alert. I didn't enter. I retreated to my car, pulled out my phone, and accessed my home security system. I'd installed a robust setup when I moved in, not out of fear for Maple Creek, but out of habit. It was a professional-grade system with redundant cloud storage, encrypted feeds, and silent alerts. I scrolled through the event log. There it was. An entry event at 2:17 p.m. The log was specific. Front door unlocked via key. Not forced entry. Not a picked lock. A key. My blood ran cold. I had given a spare key to exactly no one. I tapped to review the footage from the discreet camera I had positioned in the entryway, disguised as a smoke detector. The video began. The door swung open, and in walked Carol. She was dressed in her usual power-walking attire, looking less like she was checking on a property and more like she was casing it. She paused in the foyer, her eyes scanning my home, my belongings, my life. She ran a finger along a tabletop, checking for dust. She peered into the living room. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she turned and left, pulling the door closed behind her, not quite latching it. The entire invasion lasted less than 30 seconds. But it was enough. What Carol didn't know was that she hadn't just trespassed into the home of some quiet retiree she could push around with inane rules. She had just kicked in the door of a man whose entire career was built on dismantling people far more powerful, far more intelligent, and far less sloppy than her. She thought she was asserting her petty authority. In reality, she had just activated a skill set that had been dormant for 2 years, and she had just become my final and most personal project. My quiet life was over, but her reign of terror was about to be. She had no idea who she was dealing with. and I was going to enjoy teaching her. What would you do if the one person meant to protect your community was the one violating your sanctuary? Before I even set foot back in my house, my old training kicked in. The house was no longer just a home. It was a compromised environment. I sat in my car, the engine off, and began the first phase of any investigation: threat assessment and containment. The immediate physical threat was low. Carol was a neighborhood tyrant, not a professional operative. But the psychological threat, the violation of my personal space, was profound. It had to be addressed, not with anger, but with cold, methodical precision. I saved a copy of the video file to 3 separate secure locations before even thinking about my next move. Digital evidence is fragile, and I wanted immutable proof. Only then did I get out of my car and walk to my front door. Inside, I did a slow, careful sweep of every room. It wasn't about looking for what she might have taken. I knew this was a robbery. It was about understanding her intent. What was she looking for? What was her goal? The house was exactly as I had left it, save for the ghost of her presence. The air felt different, tainted. My immediate impulse was to confront her, to march over to her house, shove my phone in her face, and watch her squirm. But my professional side held me back. A direct confrontation would only make her defensive. She would lie, gaslight, and rally her supporters. It would become my word against hers, video evidence notwithstanding. In the world of HOA politics, I was the outsider, the newcomer. She was the established power. No, a direct assault was a fool's errand. I needed to handle this the way I handle my old cases, with strategy, documentation, and overwhelming, undeniable proof presented at a time and place of my choosing. My first step was to try the reasonable person approach, if only to document its failure for the record. I looked up her number on the HOA directory and made the call. She answered with a sickeningly sweet, "Carol speaking." "Carol, this is Alex from 112 Willow Lane," I said, my voice intentionally level and calm. "I'm calling about an issue in my house this afternoon." "Oh, Mr. Henderson, is everything all right?" The feigned concern was nauseating. Not entirely. My security system logged an unauthorized entry at 2:17 p.m. The footage shows you entering my home with a key. I'd like an explanation. There was a brief pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears in her head spinning, cycling through potential lies. "Oh, my goodness, that must have been a misunderstanding," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "We had a report from a neighbor about a strange smell coming from your property. As president, it's my duty to ensure everything is okay. I was simply performing a welfare check. It's perfectly within the bylaws. I had, of course, already read the bylaws cover to cover when I moved in. It was standard practice for me. I'm looking at Section 7, Article 4 of the bylaws right now. Carol," I responded coolly. "It states the board can only enter a property without consent in the event of a verifiable emergency, like a fire or a flood, and only after attempting to contact the homeowner. You did not contact me, and I can assure you, my house doesn't smell." Another pause, this one tighter. "Well," she huffed, her sweet tone vanishing. "The report I received was deemed credible. I was acting in the community's best interest. You should be thanking me, I'm not. You trespassed, Carol. And more pressing question is, how did you get a key to my house?" "The association maintains a master key for all properties for emergency access," she snapped, her defensiveness escalating. "It's for everyone's safety." This was a new and alarming piece of information. A master key in her hands was like giving a pyromaniac a book of matches. The call ended with her threatening to fine me for my accusatory tone and hanging up. The reasonable person approach had failed exactly as I predicted, but now it was documented. I had a recording of the call, legally obtained in my one-party consent state. The very next day, the escalation began. A crisp white envelope was stuck to my door. It was an official violation notice from the HOA. The fine was for $100 for unauthorized security modifications, citing my cameras as being out of compliance with aesthetic standards. It was a clear act of retaliation. 2 days later, another fine appeared. This time, it was $150 for this substandard condition of the lawn, which was patently absurd. My lawn was immaculate, a lush green carpet, I took quiet pride in. Carol was sending a message. I control this place, and I can make your life miserable. I knew appealing to the HOA board would be useless. The board members were her hand-picked cronies, people who either benefited from her power or were too afraid to cross her. I filed the formal complaint anyway, again for the paper trail. As expected, a week later, I received a letter informing me that the board had reviewed my complaint and found Carol's actions to be fully compliant with her duties. As president, my appeal was denied. The message was now crystal clear. The system was rigged. The official channels were a dead end. Some of my neighbors offered quiet, sympathetic glances, but no one wanted to get involved. They had seen what happened to people who challenged Carol. They were subjected to a relentless campaign of fines, violations, and public shaming at HOA meetings. I was on my own, and that was perfectly fine. I had spent my career being on my own, facing down organizations far more powerful than a suburban homeowners association. Carol and her little board thought they had cornered me. They thought their flimsy bylaws and scare tactics would make me back down. They were about to learn that they hadn't cornered an ordinary resident. They had cornered a predator, and I was now going to hunt. My quiet, peaceful retirement was officially over. The game was on. The moment the HOA board's dismissal letter arrived, a switch flipped in my mind. The frustration and annoyance I had been feeling evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar focus. This was no longer a neighborhood squabble. This was an operation. Carol had escalated from petty tyranny to illegal activity and targeted harassment. She and her board had demonstrated a complete disregard for the law and their own governing documents. They believed they were untouchable. My job was to prove them wrong. The first step in any operation is to secure your base. My home was my base, and it had been compromised. I called a locksmith that very afternoon, not a standard local guy, but a high-security specialist I knew from my old life. He replaced my locks with a registered keyway system. This meant the keys couldn't be duplicated by anyone but him, and only with my express authorization. There would be no more master key for Carol. Next, I upgraded my surveillance. The existing cameras were good, but I needed something more. I installed several new, smaller cameras with better resolution and audio capabilities, covering every angle of my property's exterior and key entry points inside. They were all linked to a new dedicated server in my basement, which backed up to an off-site, encrypted cloud service every 5 minutes. If Carol tried to disable my local system, it wouldn't matter. The evidence would already be safe. With my fortress secured, I moved on to the second phase, intelligence gathering. I needed to understand the full scope of Carol's operation. Her trespassing was the symptom. The disease was likely deeper. People like Carol, those who crave absolute control over the smallest domains, are almost always hiding something more significant. Power corrupts, and the petty power of an HOA president can corrupt just as easily as any other. My hunt began in the most boring place imaginable, the HOA's public records. I downloaded every financial statement, budget report, and set of meeting minutes going back 5 years. To a normal person, it was a mountain of impenetrable jargon and tedious numbers. To a forensic accountant, it was a treasure map. I spent the next week holed up in my office, which now resembled my old agency workspace. I had whiteboards, spreadsheets, and a pot of coffee that was perpetually brewing. I began by digitizing the records, creating a searchable database. Then, I started cross-referencing, looking for patterns, anomalies, and red flags. On the surface, everything looked plausible. The budgets were balanced, the expenses seemed reasonable. The official audits, conducted by a small local accounting firm, gave the HOA a clean bill of health each year. But I knew that surface-level reviews were designed to be clean. The real story is always in the details, in the things people hope you won't look at too closely. I focused on the vendors. The HOA spent tens of thousands of dollars a year on landscaping, pool maintenance, insurance, and legal fees. I started running the names of these companies through state and federal corporate databases. Most were legitimate, established businesses, but one stood out, a landscaping company called Evergreen Excellence. The payments to this company were consistent, almost too consistent. Every month, a payment for exactly $4,500. No fluctuations for seasonal work, no special invoices for new plantings or storm cleanup. It was a flat fee, which was unusual for landscaping. More suspiciously, the payments had started just 2 months after Carol was elected president 4 years ago. Before that, the HOA used a different, well-known local company whose invoices varied logically with the seasons. I did a deep dive into Evergreen Excellence. It was a registered LLC, but it had a minimal public footprint. No website, no reviews, just a mailing address that turned out to be a P.O. box in the next town over. This was a massive red flag. Legitimate businesses want to be found. Shell companies want to hide. I used a proprietary database I still had access to, one that scrapes and connects information from public records, social media, and other sources. I plugged in the name of the registered agent for the LLC. The search took a few minutes, churning through data. Then the result came back, and it was the aha moment I'd been waiting for. The registered agent for Evergreen Excellence was a man named Robert Patterson. A quick cross-reference of Carol's social media and public records revealed that Robert Patterson was her brother-in-law. The thread was now in my hand. This wasn't just about bad management. This was textbook fraud. Carol was using her position to funnel HOA dues to her own family through a shell company charging exorbitant rates for what was likely substandard or non-existent work. This explained her desperation for control. She wasn't just protecting her ego. She was protecting her criminal enterprise. The trespassing, the harassment, it was all to intimidate anyone who might get curious enough to start asking questions and pulling on that thread. While this financial discovery was unfolding, I continued to investigate the master key issue. I took a different, more human approach. I started taking daily walks around the neighborhood, deliberately being more friendly and open. I chatted with people doing yard work, complimented their gardens. I eventually struck up a regular conversation with an older woman named Margaret, who had lived in Maple Creek for over 30 years. She was sharp and had a healthy distrust of Carol. One afternoon, while discussing the ridiculousness of the new mailbox paint color rule, I casually brought up the master key. It's just a bit concerning, the idea of one person having a key to every house, I said. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You know, we never had that before, Carol, she said, lowering her voice. The old president, Mr. Abernathy, he said it was a huge liability. Carol pushed it through a few years ago, called it an emergency preparedness initiative. Most of us thought it was strange, but she could be very persuasive. She had just given me the final piece of the puzzle. The master key system wasn't a long-standing community policy. It was Carol's invention. She had created the very tool she was now using to intimidate residents and, as I suspected, to protect her financial scheme. I now had 2 powerful lines of attack: the clear-cut criminal act of her trespassing and a well-documented case of financial fraud and embezzlement. Now, it was time to move from intelligence gathering to strategy. It was time to build a trap. With the twin pillars of trespassing and financial fraud firmly established, my path forward became clear. I couldn't simply expose one without the other. The trespassing was personal and immediate, but the financial crimes were the root of her corruption, the motive behind her tyrannical behavior. To truly dismantle her reign, I had to link them together in a single, inescapable narrative. A simple police report about the trespassing would lead to her being charged, but she could paint it as a personal vendetta, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an angry newcomer. The HOA board would back her, and she might escape with a slap on the wrist, leaving her power structure intact. Conversely, dropping a bomb of financial documents at an HOA meeting would be chaotic. She would deny everything, shred records, and use HOA funds to hire expensive lawyers to tie me up in court for years. I needed to orchestrate a sequence of events where the evidence for both crimes would be revealed in a way that was public, irrefutable, and left her with no room to maneuver. The plan began to form in my mind, a multi-stage operation designed to use her own arrogance and paranoia against her. The centerpiece of the plan would be a second, perfectly documented instance of her trespassing. The first video was damning, but a second, even more blatant entry would establish a clear pattern of criminal behavior, making it impossible for her to claim it was a one-time welfare check. I had to bait the trap, and I knew exactly what bait to use. Her own suspicion. She had entered my home once already. I needed to give her a compelling reason to do it again. My quiet resistance and formal complaints had likely put her on edge. She would be wondering what I was up to. I decided to give her something to wonder about. I spent an evening staging my home office. On my desk, in plain sight, I placed a file folder labeled HOA Financial Review inside. I put a few of the publicly available budget printouts, along with some pages of handwritten notes filled with accounting jargon, circling the payments to Evergreen Excellence and adding question marks. I also included a printout of the corporate registration for her brother-in-law's company. It was bait, pure and simple. If she entered my house again, she wouldn't be able to resist looking at that file. And when she did, her motive would shift from simple snooping to actively tampering with a potential investigation, a far more serious offense. The next step was to create the opportunity. I needed her to believe I was gone, that the house was empty and she had free reign. I drafted a formal notification to the HOA board, citing a ridiculous bylaw Carol herself had instituted a year prior, which required homeowners to inform the board of any absence longer than 48 hours for insurance and security purposes. My letter stated that I would be out of town on a family matter for 1 week, starting on the upcoming Monday. I made sure to hand-deliver the letter to the HOA's mailbox, knowing she checked it daily. I was dangling the perfect opportunity in front of a predator, confident she wouldn't be able to resist. Now for the legal and technical backbone of the trap. I contacted a lawyer I knew, a sharp woman named Jessica, who specialized in HOA and property law. I laid out the entire situation for her. The initial trespassing, the retaliatory fines, the financial fraud I had uncovered, and my plan to bait a second entry. Jessica was initially cautious. "This is tricky territory, Alex. Entrapment is a real defense, and we need to make sure we don't cross that line. I'm not forcing her to do anything," I explained. "I'm merely creating an environment where she will feel comfortable enough to repeat a crime she has already committed. Her decision to enter my home will be hers and hers alone. I'm just making sure it's caught on high-definition video with crystal-clear audio this time." After reviewing my evidence, Jessica agreed. She saw the pattern of harassment and the strength of the financial case. She agreed to be on standby and to help me navigate the legal fallout. Her most crucial piece of advice was to involve law enforcement, but to do it carefully. Walking into a police station with a wild story about an HOA president could get me dismissed as a crank. I needed to present my case with the same professionalism I would have used at my old agency. I prepared a briefing file. It contained the initial video of Carol's entry, the log from my security system, a copy of the threatening violation notices, a recording of our phone call, and a high-level summary of the financial irregularities I had discovered, including the direct link between Carol and Evergreen Excellence. I wasn't just a disgruntled homeowner. I was a professional presenting the preliminary findings of an investigation. My plan was crystallizing. I would create the opportunity. I would document the crime. I would have law enforcement ready to act. And then, once the criminal charges were laid, I would attend the next HOA meeting and expose the financial rot to the entire community, cutting down her support and her cronies in one public execution. Her arrogance was the fuel, my planning was the spark, and the explosion was going to be spectacular. All I had to do now was light the fuse. The first meeting with the Maple Creek Police Department was a calculated risk. I knew from experience that local law enforcement is often overworked and inundated with neighborhood disputes that are more civil than criminal. The key was to frame my issue not as a petty grievance, but as a pattern of escalating criminal behavior that required their intervention. I made an appointment, not just showing up at the front desk, and asked to speak with a detective in the Property Crimes Division. I was eventually led to the desk of a man named Detective Miller. He was a classic, weary-looking cop in his late 40s, with a coffee-stained desk and a skeptical arch to his eyebrows. He listened patiently as I began, his expression betraying a familiar, "Here we go again." Look, as I mentioned the words, HOA dispute, I let him have his skepticism. Then, I opened my meticulously prepared briefing file. I didn't lead with my emotions or opinions. I led with data. At 2:17 p.m. on Tuesday, the 14th, I began sliding a glossy photo print of a timestamped screenshot from my security footage across the desk. The individual you see here, Carol Miller, the president of my HOA, used an unauthorized key to illegally enter my home. I followed it with the system log printout. This was not a forced entry. She used a key she should not possess. Miller's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. He was still in listening mode, but the bored glaze was gone. I continued, laying out the subsequent events in chronological order. My phone call with her, where she admitted to the entry under a false pretext, the retaliatory and baseless fines designed to intimidate me, the dismissal of my official complaint by her board. With each point, I provided documentation. The audio file of the call, copies of the violation notices, the letter from the board. This isn't just a disagreement over lawn maintenance, detective, I said, my voice even. This is a targeted campaign of harassment and intimidation, originating from the legal act of trespassing. I paused, letting him process the information. Then I played my trump card, explaining my professional background. For 20 years, my job was to investigate financial crimes and digital intrusions for the federal government. My expertise is in pattern recognition and evidence collection. And Ms. Miller's pattern is deeply concerning. Miller leaned forward, now fully engaged. So what do you want from me, Mr. Henderson? I have reason to believe she will attempt to enter my home again, I said. I've arranged my affairs to be out of town next week. I've even notified the HOA, per her own ridiculous rule. I believe she will take this opportunity to enter my home again, likely to search for anything she can use against me. I outlined the trap, the stage file on my desk, the upgraded camera system. When she enters my home, a crime will be in progress. I want the police to be there to witness it and make an arrest. I'm not asking you to do anything proactive. Just be ready to respond when I give you the signal that the crime is happening in real time. Detective Miller was silent for a long moment, tapping a pen on his desk. He was no longer looking at me like a crank. He was looking at me like a professional colleague. Your evidence is compelling, he finally admitted, and your plan is thorough. It borders on entrapment, but given that she has already committed the act once, a judge would likely see it as providing an opportunity rather than inducing a crime she wouldn't otherwise commit, he agreed. He couldn't post a squad car outside my house, but he gave me his direct desk line and cell number. He created a preliminary case file and told me to call him the second I had visual confirmation of her approach. He would coordinate a silent dispatch to a nearby staging area, ready to move in on his command. I left the station feeling a surge of adrenaline. The machine was in motion. Meanwhile, Carol's overconfidence was becoming a spectacle. At a small community barbecue that weekend, which I attended specifically for observation, she was in her element. She held court near the grill, pontificating about the importance of community standards. I overheard her talking to one of her board cronies, a smug man named Gary. The new guy on Willow Lane is finally learning his place, she said with a laugh, loud enough for those around her to hear. He sent a letter saying he'll be gone for a week. Probably couldn't handle the pressure. Gary chuckled obsequiously. You showed him who's boss. Carol, my friendly neighbor, Margaret, who was standing near the potato salad, caught my eye and gave me a subtle, sympathetic shake of her head. Later, she quietly approached me. I hope you're not letting her get to you, Alex. She's a nasty piece of work. I'm handling it, Margaret, I said with a calm smile. Don't you worry. What she didn't know was that another neighbor's porch security camera, the one perfectly angled towards the barbecue, had captured Carol's boastful conversation. That neighbor, tired of Carol's reign but too scared to act, had anonymously emailed me the audio file that evening. It was another golden piece of evidence, demonstrating her specific intent and malice towards me. It showed that her actions weren't about community standards. They were personal. She saw my notification of absence not as a piece of information, but as a victory. She believed she had driven me away. Her arrogance was making her sloppy. She was so sure of her power, so convinced of my defeat, that she couldn't fathom she was walking into a meticulously constructed cage of her own making. The stage was set. The actors were in place. All that was left was for the curtain to rise on her final performance. Monday morning arrived, cloaked in the deceptive tranquility of a perfect suburban day. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and I was preparing for war. My preparations were theatrical and deliberate. I packed 2 large suitcases with old clothes and blankets, ensuring they looked heavy and full. At precisely 9 a.m., a time when I knew many of my neighbors, including Carol's network of gossips, were having their morning coffee, I began the performance. I loaded the suitcases into the trunk of my car with a sense of weary resignation, making sure to sigh audibly a few times. I did a slow, conspicuous walk around the house, checking the windows and doors, playing the part of a homeowner leaving for an extended trip. The final touch was placing a no flyers or solicitation sign on my door, a clear signal that the house was unoccupied. I got in my car, backed out of the driveway, and drove down the street, not even glancing towards Carol's house. I drove for 10 minutes, circling the neighborhood from a distance, before heading to my real destination, a nondescript hotel less than 2 miles away. I had booked a corner room on the top floor, one with a clear line of sight to the cell tower that serviced my home's security network, ensuring the strongest possible signal. The room was my temporary command center. I had already brought in my equipment the night before: a powerful laptop, 2 large external monitors, and a secure, encrypted hard drive. Within minutes of arriving, I had the video feeds from my home displayed across the screens. One monitor showed a 4-camera grid of the exterior: the front porch, the driveway, the back door, and the side of the house. The other monitor was dedicated to the 2 new interior cameras, one in the foyer and one in my office, aimed directly at the baited file on my desk. I settled into the cheap hotel chair, a thermos of black coffee beside me, and I began the waiting game. This was a part of the job I was familiar with, yet it never got easier. The long stretches of utter boredom punctuated by moments of heart-pounding tension. It required a specific kind of patience, a stillness of mind that was hard to maintain. The first day passed with excruciating slowness. The only activity was a mail carrier, a squirrel, and a teenager on a skateboard. No sign of Carol. My mind started to play tricks on me. Had I miscalculated? Was she smarter than I gave her credit for? Had her crony Gary warned her it might be a trap? I forced those thoughts down. My assessment of her personality profile, narcissistic, arrogant, and compulsive, suggested she wouldn't be able to resist. She needed to re-establish her dominance, to walk through my space and confirm her victory. I just had to wait for her compulsion to override her caution. Tuesday was a repeat of Monday. More sun, more squirrels, more agonizingly slow hours staring at a static image of my own empty house. I started to feel the strain, the sleep deprivation from being on high alert, the bad coffee, the recycled air of the hotel room. Doubt was a corrosive acid, and I had to actively fight to keep it from eating away at my confidence in the plan. I reviewed my evidence, reread my notes, and reminded myself of her actions. She had done it before. She would do it again. On Wednesday afternoon, my vigilance was rewarded. At 3:12 p.m., a motion alert pinged on my laptop, the sound cutting through the silence of the room like a gunshot. My head snapped to the monitor. There it was. Carol's signature white golf cart was rolling slowly down the street. It didn't pull into my driveway, but parked 2 houses down, a clumsy attempt at stealth. I watched as she got out, her phone pressed to her ear, pretending to be on a call. She glanced up and down the street, a predator surveying her territory. My heart began to pound, a heavy, rhythmic drum against my ribs. All the doubt and fatigue vanished, replaced by a laser-like focus. This was it. She walked casually up my driveway, her eyes scanning the windows, looking for any sign of movement. She paused on the porch, her back to the camera, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she might lose her nerve. But then I saw her hand go to her pocket. She pulled out a small object that glinted in the afternoon sun. A key. I took a deep, steadying breath, my hand already reaching for my phone. I watched her hand move towards a lock. This was the point of no return. I dialed Detective Miller's direct line. He answered on the first ring. "Miller, Detective, it's Alex Henderson. I said, my voice low and steady, even as my pulse throbbed in my ears. It's happening. She's on my front porch. She has the key in her hand. The trap is live. Stay on the line, Alex. Detective Miller's voice was calm and professional, a grounding force in the swirling adrenaline of the moment. Do not go back to the house. I repeat, do not approach the property. We'll handle it from here. I have 2 units staging a block away. They're on standby for my signal. I kept my eyes glued to the monitor showing the front porch camera. I could hear Miller speaking to his dispatcher in the background, his words clipped and efficient. Confirming visual on the suspect. White female, blonde hair, pink athletic wear. Proceed with a silent approach on my screen. Carol inserted the key into the new high-security lock. A small LED on the lock blinked green, and an instant notification popped up on my laptop. Entry event. Key ID 002. Unauthorized. Used. It was beautiful, clean, digital evidence. The door swung open, and she stepped inside, disappearing from the exterior camera's view. My focus immediately shifted to the second monitor, the interior feeds. There she was, standing in my foyer, exactly as she had before. But this time was different. This time, the world was watching. She's inside the house, detective. I narrated, my voice a quiet, running commentary. She's in the foyer. She just closed the door behind her. I watched, my breath held, as she did a quick scan of the living room and kitchen. She was more cautious this time, moving with a slinking, furtive energy. She was looking for something. Her eyes settled on the hallway that led to my office. That was her goal. She's moving towards the back of the house now, I told Miller. She's heading for my office. Copy that, Alex. Units are in position at the front and rear of the property. We're holding until you can confirm a secondary action. We need to eliminate any possibility of her claiming she was just securing the door or checking on an alarm. I understood completely. They needed to prove clear criminal intent beyond the initial trespass. They needed her to take the bait. My heart hammered as she pushed open the office door and stepped inside. The camera I had hidden in a bookshelf had a perfect, clear view. She stood in the middle of the room, her eyes darting around before landing with magnetic precision on the file folder sitting innocently on my desk. HOA Financial Review. She hesitated for only a second. Then, her curiosity and paranoia won. She moved to the desk, picked up the file, and opened it. She's got the package. I whispered into the phone, using our prearranged jargon. She's at my desk. She is actively going through my personal files. On the screen, I could see her flipping through the pages, her expression shifting from suspicion to alarm as she saw the circled payments and the printout of her brother-in-law's corporate registration. This was it. This was the moment. Her crime was no longer ambiguous. She wasn't performing a welfare check. She wasn't securing the property. She was conducting illegal surveillance and attempting to interfere with a perceived investigation into her activities. That's what we needed. Miller's voice was grimly satisfied. Okay, Alex, we're moving in now. Stay on the line. Do you hear me? Stay on the line until we have her in custody. Copy that, I said. I switched my monitor view back to the exterior cameras. The scene was something out of a movie. 2 police officers were moving silently up my driveway towards the front door, while 2 others were creeping along the side of the house to cover the rear exit. They moved with a fluid, practiced efficiency that was both impressive and terrifying. A moment later, Detective Miller's unmarked car pulled up silently to the curb. He got out, adjusted his jacket, and walked with purpose toward my front door, taking point. The tension in the hotel room was thick enough to choke on. I was a spectator to a drama I had written and directed, and I could only watch as the final act played out. I was completely powerless, my fate in the hands of the officers on the scene. All my planning, all my research, it all came down to these next few minutes. Miller and one of the officers reached the front door. He didn't try the knob. He raised his fist and knocked 3 loud, authoritative raps that seemed to echo even through my laptop speakers. The sound of Detective Miller's knock reverberated through my home, and on my monitor, I saw Carol's head snap up. The file folder fell from her hands, scattering papers across my desk. Pure, undiluted panic washed over her face. wiping away the smug confidence she always wore like a second skin. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, first toward the office door, then to the window. She was a cornered animal, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "Carol Miller, this is the Maple Creek Police Department." Miller's voice boomed, clear and commanding even through the door. "Open the door immediately." For a moment, she was paralyzed by indecision. Then, her flight instinct took over. She scrambled from the office and ran towards the back of the house. I switched my camera view to the one covering my back patio. She fumbled with the lock on the sliding glass door, her hands shaking. Just as she managed to slide it open, she was met with the sight of two uniformed police officers standing on the patio, their expressions impassive. One of them simply shook his head. Defeated, she slid the door shut. Her escape was cut off. She was trapped inside my house with her crimes. I watched her slump against the wall for a second, her shoulders heaving. Then, as if a switch was flipped, the panic was replaced by a desperate, last-ditch attempt at bravado. She smoothed her hair, straightened her pink jacket, and marched back towards the front door, her face a mask of practiced indignation. She was going to try to lie her way out of it. She swung the door open, ready to unleash her authority. "Detective, what on earth is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "You're trespassing on private property." Miller, who stood a full foot taller than her, looked down with an expression of profound weariness. "Ma'am, we received a report of a burglary in progress at this address," he said, his voice a low, rumbling contrast to her shriek. "And seeing as you're inside a house that doesn't belong to you, it appears we've found our suspect. It was at that precise, perfect moment that I chose to make my entrance." My car, which I had parked down the street, turned the corner and pulled smoothly into my driveway. The sound of the engine made Carol's head whip around. The look on her face as I stepped out of the car, my phone still held to my ear as if finishing a call, was something I will treasure for the rest of my life. The indignant mask shattered, replaced by a ghastly pale shock. The color drained from her cheeks, and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She finally understood. The out-of-town trip, the notice, the empty house, it had all been a lie. It had all been for her. I calmly ended my call with a simple, "Thank you," and pocketed my phone. I walked towards the developing scene on my porch, my expression neutral. My heart was still hammering, but on the outside, I projected nothing but calm control. "This is a complete misunderstanding." Carol finally managed to sputter, turning back to Miller, her voice trembling. "I'm the HOA president. I was doing an emergency inspection. The back door was open. I was securing the property." Miller didn't even look at her. His eyes were on me. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Detective," I said, my voice cutting through her frantic lies. "My security system, which is live streaming to a secure cloud server, recorded Ms. Miller using an unauthorized master key to gain entry through the locked front door less than 10 minutes ago. It then recorded her entering my private office and attempting to read my personal financial documents. The entire event, including audio, has been preserved and witnessed." I looked directly at Carol. The last vestiges of her defiance crumbled under my steady gaze. She saw no anger in my eyes, no triumphant glee. She saw only the detached, final judgment of a man who had held all the cards from the very beginning. Her lies were useless. Her authority was gone. There was nowhere left for her to run. "Carol Miller," Detective Miller said, his voice leaving no room for argument as he produced a pair of handcuffs. "You are under arrest for breaking and entering and suspicion of criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent." The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around her wrists was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of my peace being restored. And as they led her, stuttering and protesting, towards a squad car, I saw the curtains twitching in the houses up and down my street. The Queen of Maple Creek had fallen, and her entire kingdom had a front-row seat. The spectacle of Carol being placed in the back of a police car sent a shockwave through the quiet suburban streets of Maple Creek. Neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the silent, flashing lights. They stood on their lawns in small, hushed groups, whispering and pointing. The invincible queen, the woman who had terrorized them with violation notices and public shamings, was being unceremoniously dethroned. Margaret stood on her porch across the street, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She caught my eye and gave me a decisive, appreciative nod. In that moment, I knew I hadn't just been fighting for myself. Carol, even in handcuffs, tried to maintain some shred of her shattered authority. "This is a mistake. You can't do this. I am the president of the Homeowners Association," she yelled as the officer ducked her head into the car. Her protests were met with the indifferent thud of the car door closing. The power she had wielded for so long had vanished, proven to be as flimsy as the paper her bogus fines were written on. But I knew my work wasn't finished. The arrest was just the first, most visible part of the operation. Dismantling her power structure required a second, more public execution. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following evening. The timing was perfect. The news of Carol's arrest spread like wildfire. The community's social media pages and email lists exploded with speculation, rumors, and, for the first time, open criticism of the board. The vice president, Carol's primary crony Gary, sent out a panicked email trying to downplay the incident as a personal dispute and a gross misunderstanding that will soon be rectified. He assured everyone the meeting would proceed as planned. He was trying to circle the wagons, to protect the corrupt system they had built. He had no idea I was about to set those wagons on fire. I spent the rest of the day and the next morning preparing. I consolidated all my financial evidence into a clear, concise presentation. I created charts showing the consistent, inflated payments to evergreen excellence. I made graphs comparing their exorbitant flat fee to the variable market rate invoices of the previous landscaping company. I included the corporate registration documents linking the company to Carol's brother-in-law and bank records I had legally subpoenaed through my lawyer, Jessica, showing transfers from the shell company's account directly into Carol's personal account. It was an airtight, undeniable case of embezzlement, fraud, and self-dealing. That evening, the community clubhouse was packed. It was the highest attendance for an HOA meeting in Maple Creek history. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Gary and the other 3 board members sat at a table at the front of the room, looking pale and nervous. They tried to stick to the usual agenda, discussing pool maintenance and holiday decorations. But the crowd was restless. Finally, during the open forum portion, I stood up and walked to the front of the room. A hush fell over the crowd. "My name is Alex Henderson," I began, my voice calm and carrying through the room. "As many of you know, yesterday our HOA president, Carol Miller, was arrested for breaking into my home. Gary immediately tried to cut me off. "This is not the proper forum for personal disputes, Mr. Henderson. We are here to discuss community business. This is not a personal dispute, Gary," I said, turned to look at him directly. "This is community business." Because I believe her criminal actions were motivated by a desire to conceal a much larger crime. A crime committed against every single homeowner in this room. I pulled a small projector from my bag and connected it to my laptop. In seconds, the first slide of my presentation was displayed on the wall behind the board members. It was a simple title, an independent financial review of the Maple Creek HOA. For the next 20 minutes, I walked the community through 4 years of systematic fraud. I spoke calmly and factually, presenting evidence, not accusations. I showed them the invoices. I showed them the corporate records. I showed them the bank transfers. With each slide, a wave of murmurs and gasps rippled through the audience. I watched the faces of the other board members. Their nervous expressions curdled into sheer panic. They were implicated, either as active co-conspirators or through gross negligence. They had approved every budget, signed off on every payment. They were trapped. When I showed the final slide, a summary showing that over $250,000 in HOA funds had been funneled through the sham landscaping company over 4 years, the room erupted. The homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. Gary and the others were speechless, their faces ashen. They had nowhere to hide. Their queen was gone, and her corrupt court was now fully exposed to the righteous anger of the people they had been stealing from. The takedown was complete. The aftermath of that explosive HOA meeting was as swift as it was decisive. The dam of fear and apathy that Carol had so carefully constructed for years had been shattered, and a flood of resident anger poured forth. Faced with undeniable evidence and a room full of furious homeowners, the remaining board members, including Gary, tendered their resignations via email before sunrise the next morning. They knew their positions were untenable, and they were rightly terrified of the legal storm that was brewing. My presentation, complete with all supporting documents, was immediately turned over to Detective Miller, who passed it to the Financial Crimes Unit. The scope of the police investigation expanded dramatically, moving from a simple trespassing case to a major felony fraud investigation. Carol, who had managed to post bail for the initial charges, soon found herself facing a raft of new, far more serious indictments for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Her brother-in-law was also charged, and the sham company, Evergreen Excellence, was dissolved. The state's attorney's office, seeing a clear-cut case of public corruption, took it on with vigor. The legal battle was long, but with the mountain of evidence I had provided, the outcome was never in doubt. Carol was convicted on multiple felony counts and was sentenced to several years in prison, a stunning and humbling end to her reign of petty tyranny. Her cronies on the board escaped jail time, but were forced to pay hefty fines and were left as pariahs in the community they had once controlled. With the old board gone, the state's Homeowner Association Oversight Board stepped in to manage Maple Creek's affairs temporarily. They called for a special election to form a new board. This time, the election was hotly contested, with numerous residents, once too intimidated to get involved, stepping up to run. A new board was elected, a diverse group of genuinely concerned homeowners led by none other than my neighbor, Margaret, who was overwhelmingly voted in as the new president. Her first act was to commission a full, independent, top-to-bottom audit of the HOA's finances. They rewrote the bylaws, adding new transparency requirements and strict conflict of interest rules. Most importantly, Article 9, Section 3, the Emergency Preparedness Initiative that had created the Master Key system, was unanimously and permanently abolished. All existing master keys were collected and destroyed in a symbolic ceremony at the next community barbecue. The recovered funds, which were eventually recouped through court-ordered restitution and insurance claims, were put to good use. The community pool was renovated, a new playground was built, and for the first time in over a decade, our monthly HOA dues were actually lowered. A sense of trust and community began to return to Maple Creek. People were friendlier, more engaged. The cloud of suspicion and fear that Carol had cultivated had finally lifted. As for me, I finally got what I had moved here for: peace. My neighbors no longer saw me as the strange, quiet newcomer, but as the man who had liberated them. I was treated with a quiet respect that was far more meaningful than any fawning deference Carol had demanded. I could put my garbage cans out at any angle I pleased. My life returned to a quiet rhythm of gardening, reading, and enjoying my retirement. I had been forced back into a world of conflict and strategy one thought I had left behind, but I didn't regret it. The experience taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the fight for peace requires you to go to war. It reminded me that allowing petty tyranny to go unchallenged only emboldens it. Bullies, whether they're in a corporate boardroom, a government office, or a suburban HOA, thrive on the silence and inaction of others. They count on people being too busy, too tired, or too scared to stand up. My final moral is this: don't ever underestimate the power of a single, determined individual armed with the truth. Arrogance and the abuse of power are incredibly fragile constructs. They can be dismantled by careful research, strategic thinking, and the courage to speak up. You don't need an army to fight injustice. You just need to be willing to pull on that one loose thread and keep pulling until the entire corrupt tapestry unravels. Always stand up to bullies, no matter how powerful they seem. You never know how many other people you're standing up for at the same time. Have you ever had to deal with a power-tripping authority figure in your own life? I'd be very interested to read your stories in the comments below.